Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Maria Ferguson. I'm the curator here at the Roger Tory Peterson Institute, located in Jamestown, New York. And I'm joined by Rachel Kaczynski and Christian Buffon. How did I do? Today, we are delighted to be joined by Rosalie Haizlett. Rosalie's art is featured in our current exhibition, Wildwing, Paintings by Rosalie Haizlett, which is on view here until June 2nd. Wildwing features works that Rosalie created based on her research of the Peterson collection during her artist residency here at RTPI in 2023. Today, Rosalie will discuss the aspects of Roger Tory Peterson's artwork and career that surprised her, and will give us a behind-the-scenes look at the making of her watercolor and gouache paintings for Wildwing. She'll also introduce us to some contemporary nature artists that she's currently inspired by. For more information about Rosalie, you can visit her website, which we will add to the chat. And if you have any questions during the talk, please feel free to type them into the chat box. At the end of the talk, Rachel will read your questions to Rosalie. And we are recording this talk, so if you would like to watch again at a later date, or if someone was not able to watch it, you can head to our page on Vimeo, and we will add that link to the chat as well. So without further ado, please welcome Rosalie Haizlett.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad that you're here. This is my artist talk for Wildwing, but I'm also going to share a little bit about my work in general and my kind of mission as an artist. So let's dive in. A little bit about me. I am from West Virginia. I currently live in Elkins, West Virginia, which is on the edge of Monongahela National Forest. It's a really beautiful part of the state. And I've been a full-time nature illustrator for almost 6 years. And basically, I made that title up for myself. Since then, I've encountered a few other people who call themselves nature illustrators, but this is just kind of the fusion of my two main interests in life. I love spending time outdoors and learning about my surroundings, and I love making beautiful things and celebrating the beauty all around us. And so I've kind of fused those two passions into my job, and I love what I do. So here are my books. My first book was Watercolor and Nature on the left, and that's a watercolor workbook that came out a few years ago. It guides students through how to paint 20 different things that they could find outside on a hike. And then my second book is coming out on September 1st, and this is a sneak peek of the cover. I haven't officially released this yet, but I figured you all could keep a secret. And so it's called Tiny Worlds of the Appalachian Mountains. And basically this book is, I fell down a very deep rabbit hole of looking at tiny, interesting, often overlooked plants, animals, and fungi. And that deep dive started in 2018. I started out with mushrooms that I was finding, like little mushrooms, and started painting those. And then it kind of spiraled out into every month I would paint a interesting animal of West Virginia that I found and learned about. And then I eventually came up with this book idea where I would travel from the southern part of the Appalachian Mountain Range all the way up to the northern part in Canada. It ends in Newfoundland. And just hike slowly, look really carefully, and try to document by painting all of the interesting things that I saw and to write about my observations. And so this book is hefty. It's 240 pages. Every page, pretty much, except for a couple, has an illustration on it. So it was basically my dream project, and I'm really excited about it. That 50 of those original paintings will be part of a traveling art exhibition that is going to open in August in Charleston, West Virginia, and then go to the North Carolina Arboretum and then the Pittsburgh Botanic Garden. So, and with each of these stops, I'm going to be doing in-person workshops and artist talks and book signings. So if any of you can make it to one of those events, I would love to meet you in person. Other things that I've done recently, I was commissioned to illustrate a commemorative map for Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania last year. And that was really fun. I do these maps of public lands to kind of combine the ecology of a place with the landscapes that people are very attached to, and kind of like a loosely kind of artistic rendering of a map. And just kind of a fun thing that I've been doing for a while. And on the right, you can see a beer can. So I've collaborated with different organizations, like conservation organizations, to celebrate flora and fauna on beer cans. I think I've done 15 now for 2 different breweries. And that's a really fun sort of collaboration because people don't really expect to learn something when they look at a beer label. And they also don't really expect to see hand done art. So it's kind of like an interesting way to share this love of nature and art with people who are just kind of sitting around in a bar, maybe not really thinking about nature or art. Other projects that I've done, I collaborated with a yoga mat company to create zoomed in floral textures. That project was a little bit of the precursor to my Wildwing project because it was my first time doing really big paintings where I zoomed in on textures in nature. That was all focused on botanicals. And on the right, you can see a sign that I created for the Canaan Valley Wildlife Refuge in West Virginia. Features an endangered salamander, and it's just really fun to drive past that thing all the time and see my salamander. So that brings me to my residency at RTPI. And so it was kind of serendipitous how I got connected with them. So on my birthday weekend a few years ago, we took a little road trip to Lake Erie and happened to stay in this little town. And we Googled things to do within 30 minutes of this town. And we found this place. And I was kind of in disbelief because it seemed too good to be true that there was a Center for Nature and Art in one. And so we went and it was beautiful. And I learned about the residency there and applied the next year. So who is Roger Tory Peterson? He was a very renowned ornithologist and illustrator. He was born in 1908 and passed away in 1996. And he helped make birdwatching and field identification of plants, moths, etc., accessible to a broader audience. He's often referred to as the father of modern birding because he had this special way of pointing out distinguishable features that the average person who doesn't know a ton about birds could easily see, like, oh, that's the difference between a white-throated sparrow and a house sparrow, because he had this special, very clear way of depicting his subject matter. So the Institute is the place where hundreds of his original paintings and drawings are housed in archives, and they also host art exhibits about nature and conservation and the marriage of the two. And their motto is "Art that matters to the planet," which I kept the little business card from my first trip there because that is like my motto, and it was really cool. Not the exact words, but very similar. And so it was cool to see all of these like-minded folks there. So for my residency, it was last May, and I was there for a week, and this was my desk on the right. And so basically I had a full week to have free access to all of his original paintings and his library of his personal books that he collected throughout his life. And I had time to brainstorm the project that I wanted to do. I knew that I would have a show at the Institute the following year, so I could come up with any idea that I wanted to and bring it to life. It was a really lovely time. Also, I included this field guide on the left because you might recognize it now, even if you didn't know his name before. If you enjoy the outdoors and have explored field guides at all, you've probably come across a Peterson guide because they're kind of everywhere. One of my favorite aspects of the residency was exploring his library. So they moved all of his books to this new center. This wasn't like his house library, but I love old books, and I love just everything about the aesthetic. I love the linen covers and the gold embossed lettering. And it was just a treasure trove of beautiful out of print books that I don't know that I would have been able to access elsewhere. So I love that. I included the one on the left because I just thought that was the sweetest illustration. Here is just another cover that I was artistically inspired by, and a fun little nugget that I discovered was that either he or a friend or whoever he got these books from had pressed flowers and plants in a bunch of the books. And so I found four-leaf clover that I was pretty excited about. He also had dozens of instructional art books in the library, and this was like very reassuring to me because I was there, I was surrounded by all of his incredible art, and like I feel like I've spent my whole life working toward my skills on this other level of like his work is just stunning. But then to see that he learned from other people was really inspiring, that he had like intro to, scratchboard and different books like that, where he wasn't born with knowing how to do these things. He just, at a pretty young age, I think when he was in high school, he started sketching, and then he continued to learn and be a student of his craft for his whole life. So I got to spend a lot of time in the archives. There's actually a digital catalog of almost all of his work that is publicly available. I don't know if someone could maybe share that link. So basically I went through the digital catalog on a computer and typed in keywords of like what I was interested in, and then the archivist would help me find the original work to look at. And in the archives, there are more than 1,500 published and unpublished paintings, book plates, and sketches. So it was very exciting to see all of that. Also in the archives were different tools that he used, including his cameras and which I can't imagine lugging those cameras around to the places that he went to, because he traveled the world for his work and had to hike in places and camp, and he had like all this crazy gear. But it was really cool to see that. And then also his binoculars and his binocular case with his signature on it. It just made him feel like a real guy who went out there and did cool stuff. Okay, so I'm going to share a few of my favorite paintings from the archives with you. This one I think is hilarious. I just love how different this little posse is. Each one is so different, but they're all hanging out. They're all friends. This painting was, I don't know the exact dimensions, but almost all of his work was way smaller than I expected. I thought that it would be larger and then shrunk down to be put in the field guides and books, but a lot of it was just slightly bigger than the actual book, which kind of blew my mind because the detail that he packed in there is really crazy. But this was pre-Photoshop, so he had to like do everything to be shrunk down to like a specific ratio. It was just very, very exact. Really liked this one because of the fun composition and the movement. This was a gouache painting. He did a lot of gouache and watercolor and ink paintings. This is another example of how he did things differently because he was working pre-Photoshop. So if I do illustrated maps, but when I do them, if I wanted to combine an illustrated map with like this bird pool illustration, I would just probably do them separately and then digitally layer them because it's way easier to adjust and everything. But he had to do everything, exact, like how it's going to look in the book. And sometimes he would even cut out like the bird painting and paste it very, very carefully on top so that it's when it's scanned, you can't see that it was two separate paintings. So just really interesting to see how he like constructed everything to make it so precise. This was another favorite. I just really like that he showed the predator and the prey. And I don't know, I think it was so many of his paintings had to be very descriptive for the field guide. So it'd be like a whole bunch of birds in one genus, and he had to just be very exact and straightforward. But some of the paintings he was able to play with a bit more, and you could really see his interest in fine art showing through and his creativity. And so I really liked finding those ones. This one I think is my favorite of the whole collection. It's just so chaotic in a really great way. I'm not really sure what all these birds have in common, but they are awesome. Oh, and another thing that I noticed is that to get these like cool kind of gradient backgrounds that you see here, he would airbrush the background and then paint over it with gouache and watercolor, which I just never considered airbrush as a tool that you would use for illustration, but before a lot of digital technology, that's what you had to do. Another one that I really liked, like the composition, like the color scheme. I was really drawn to his paintings where it felt like he had enhanced the color a little bit, or just really captured birds that have a whole bunch of different colors on them. And you'll see later on that was one of the sources of inspiration for my series. So speaking of ideas, my initial idea for my show was to feature nocturnal winged creatures. I was going to call it Midnight Flight. And so when I arrived, I had this idea in my mind, and I looked for a lot of photos and paintings that he'd done of nocturnal creatures like woodcocks and owls and everything. And I also looked through his journals and writing about field observations that he'd done of nocturnal creatures. And I found a few things, but not very much. I think, so I saw in one of his books that he camped out in a lighthouse one time and he set up mist nets to catch migratory birds. And I'm not sure if he was banding them or identifying them. That was one way that he studied nocturnal creatures, but I didn't find a lot to go off of. But I had this idea while I was there of, based on the lighthouse thing. I looked up immediately, I looked up lighthouses that you could rent out and sleep in, because I was like, oh, I could rent one out on Airbnb and see what nocturnal creatures I could find in the lighthouse. They were all extremely expensive, as you can imagine. So I found a fire tower near my house called the Thorny Mountain Fire Tower that you can rent out for the night. And the problem was the booking was a full year out. So I booked it, but it's for this coming June, next month. So I was kind of thinking like, I don't know, if I wasn't feeling this project like it was coming together yet. And I still want to do this project, but I think I want to wait till I do the overnight in the fire tower and then figure out how I want to write about that. So I shifted gears a little bit, and what my show ended up being was called Wildwing, an artistic tribute to common backyard birds. And I'm very grateful for everybody at RTPI for letting me shift gears a bit, because I just sometimes, especially with like a small project like this, it's worth it to go with what you're really excited about in the moment. And I just felt myself, especially after finishing up my Tiny Worlds book that was included a lot of illustrations where I had to show the whole creature. I really wanted to kind of work more largely and loosely and use bigger brushes and really enjoy the patterns and be a little less literal with my work. And this definitely scratched that itch. So the story behind this series is that I was thinking about the backyard birds that I grew up with, like black-capped chickadees, blue jays, tufted titmice, little things blocking this one over here. Oh, cardinals, house sparrows, and dark-eyed juncos, and all these guys that we would see at our feeder when I was a kid. And I really liked them. I thought they were really cool. But as I grew up and as I got more interested in birds and started going on bird walks with people, I started to notice the way that very experienced birders would sometimes dismiss these kinds of birds because they were disappointed. They would see movement in a tree and they'd put their binoculars, they'd point their binoculars up in that direction. And then if it was like a chickadee, they'd be like, oh, just a chickadee. It was like not a good bird. And I started to hear the term like good bird and trash bird. And at first I was like, that's so sad. They're just like living their lives and they're beautiful. They're just so common that we dismiss them. But eventually, after being more interested in birding for a while, I started to feel that kind of flash of disappointment when I think I saw like a cerulean warbler and then it's just a blue jay. So this project was an effort to rekindle my appreciation for the common backyard birds in my region. And I chose 3 birds to celebrate with this series. So I chose the blue jay, the northern cardinal, and the northern yellow-shafted flicker. And the reason I chose these 3 is because they create a primary color scheme together that I think is really not frequently seen in the natural world. And I also like never work with primary colors in my own art. So this felt like a fun experiment in a different direction. So these are some of my paintings on display right now at the Institute. They'll be up through June if you get a chance to see them. And the first in this series I call Classy Cardinal. I'm not very good at naming paintings, so I just went with alliteration. But this one you can see I just kind of zoomed in on a male cardinal wing and cropped it in an interesting way and added a funky bright blue to the background. And one thing I learned while I was doing this series is that I was trying to look into like why certain birds are colored in certain ways. And I learned that cardinals get their red plumage from eating foods like wild grapes, dogwood berries, mulberries, etc., which contain carotenoids, which is a fat soluble pigment. And that this food that they eat actually creates the red, orange, yellow, and pinks of bird feathers. I thought that was quite interesting. Oh, and this is the actual photo that I referenced, and it's from the McGill Bird Observatory in Quebec. And they just have this awesome database of wings of every bird that they've caught. And they're really kind and let me use their photos for my series. And to get the really vibrant colors in this series, I used Dr. P.H. Martin's Hydrus liquid watercolors for all people out there who might like to do watercolor. So I kind of blocked in the painting with regular watercolors like Daniel Smith and Winsor & Newton brands. And then once I had everything kind of laid out, I would go into the parts that I really wanted to intensify with this really pure, vibrant pigment. And I got colors that I've never been able to get before with this paint. Sorry, my foot just went off. Okay. So this is just a step-by-step of the Classy Cardinal painting. So this was probably day one. I was just blocking in the large areas with a big brush, and I really liked that phase. It felt very loose and free. So my first step is I grid my huge sheet of watercolor paper into little square grids, and then I grid my reference photo on my iPad, and then I transfer the sketch over by looking at the grid. And I didn't try to get it exact, but pretty close. And then I erase the pencil marks a little bit so it's a little clean, and then add in kind of like a neutral first base layer. This next piece is called Tail Feather Elegance, and for this one, I featured one tail feather from each of my 3 featured birds. For this, I used the Feather Atlas, which is a resource provided publicly by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And they basically like take apart birds. Like, I think they probably don't kill them. I'm assuming they're like ones that have died, and then they take all the feathers out and they scan each individual feather and they measure them so you can see exactly what each feather looks like. And this was really helpful. I kind of just looked through each collection of tail feathers and picked the one that I liked the best to include in that painting. And for the ones on black watercolor paper, I used gouache paint. I used Caran d'Ache and Winsor & Newton gouache paint. They're just 2 different brands that paired together worked really nice for this. And this was, I've done some paintings on black watercolor paper before, and I just really like the way that everything, the contrast is just really elevated. And it was extremely fun to paint feathers on the black paper. I highly recommend it because every little stroke that you make really shows up. So it was very enjoyable. The next piece is Fancy Northern Flicker, and this one, there were lots of repetitive lines in this one, but I kind of liked it. It was a bit meditative. This is the reference photo that I used. And something I learned is that males and females look alike, but males have a black mustache and females do not. And they are woodpeckers, but they mainly forage on the ground. I actually saw 2 northern flickers doing a mating dance recently. Well, it was like last year, where they fan out their bright yellow tails and they looked like luchadors fighting each other. It was really cool. They were like jumping around in circles on a branch around each other with their crazy yellow tails out. So this is probably day 1 or maybe day 2 of this painting. Each of these paintings took probably about a week. I don't paint for a full like 8-hour day. I do like 6 hours a day, because otherwise I get like a little stir crazy. But yeah, this is the fun stage when I can just fill in the big shapes. It's almost like coloring in a coloring book at this stage. This one's called Posh Profiles, and I just wanted to showcase the different beaks and the crests of the feathers on their head, and how different each of them look. This is the flicker. I learned during this process, I was reading a little bit about beak shapes, and I learned that the blue jay has a very versatile beak shape, because it needs to be able to eat things like acorns. So it needs to have like a big beak and to carry things around. It cracks open eggs sometimes and eats eggs. It also catches insects during flight on the ground. The cardinal has a triangular beak that's super strong because it crushes seeds and eats the meat out of the center. And the flicker has a chisel-shaped beak because it actually it drums on trees. It's a woodpecker, so it drums on trees to communicate and to kind of like establish its territory. It makes that loud drumming sound, but it prefers to eat on the ground. So it uses its super long beak to dig around in the dirt and eat insects like ants and slurp them up. It has a super long barbed tongue. If you're bored sometime, you should look up a picture of a flicker tongue. It's really funny. So yeah, this kind of captures all of their uniqueness. And the last one in the series is called Jazzy Blue Jay. And through this, I learned that the pigment in the blue jay feather is actually melanin, which is actually brown. So the blue color that we see is caused by scattering light through modified cells on the surface of the feather barbs, which I thought was really interesting. They're not actually blue, they're brown. If you hold up a blue jay feather in a backlit way, it'll look brown because the light isn't hitting it and reflecting off of it. This is the actual blue jay that I painted this of. So this is a famous little blue jay. This one was caught at the Wing Island Bird Banding Station in Brewster, Massachusetts. And I just really love the textures and colors on this one. I actually painted this one first in the series because I really wanted to paint all those shades of blue. This is probably day 3 of this painting. So I have everything blocked in. I have a bunch of my layers done, but I had to go a bit further with getting the contrast there. So I went in with more layers and built that up. This is probably the last day, but I still had a few details to add. I learned with blue jays that males and females look very much alike. It's very difficult to tell them apart, and that they both participate in nest building and fledgling rearing, which I think is very nice. So lastly, I wanted to share a few contemporary nature artists that I'm very inspired by and I'm connected to in different ways. The first is, and the reason I want to do this is because I think it's interesting to see how like Roger Tory Peterson's work was used as a nature artist in the 1900s and how most of his work was used for field guides. And now things have changed so much, and we have access to amazing nature documentaries and videography, and a lot of field guides use photos. So things have really changed, but there's still a place for nature artists, and it just looks a little bit different. And so here are a few people that I'm inspired by, and you might want to check out their work. The first is Liz Clayton Fuller. Liz lives in Nashville, and she's interesting because she is a scientific illustrator. She was trained for that. So she can do really crisp things like you see here, very detailed and accurate, painting every little feather just right. But then she also is a bit quirky, and she lives in Nashville. She's a Southern gal, so she likes to paint birds wearing clothes, Southern clothes. And these are kind of like 2 different sides of what she does. So they appeal to very different people. For the scientific illustration, she often works with more like educational organizations. She does a lot with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And then for her, she calls them her burbs. Her birds are scientific, her burbs are very quirky and playful. And that's more just for decoration and for the joy of it. Kristen Link is an illustrator in Alaska, and she does really cool work kind of in the same way that I do some stuff that's more decorative and some stuff that's more educational. She does kind of similar thing. This is an illustration she did of owl pellet dissection, and this is an illustration she did of a robin's nest, and her work goes on signage for like wildlife preserves. It goes in books, and she teaches nature journaling and all that stuff. And she has a book coming out that she's working on right now on field sketching that I think is going to be really awesome. Logan is a guy that I actually grew up with, and he lives in my hometown in Wheeling, West Virginia. And his work is a little less educational, but it still celebrates the natural world. And I think he does a lot of gig posters for bands, but he always incorporates plants and animals into his work in a really lovely way. And I think it's just kind of like my beer collaboration. It's just fun to like bring this appreciation for kind of strange, underrepresented species into places, into audiences that wouldn't normally be looking at this type of thing. Here's another Logan Schmidt illustration. This is an Eastern screech owl that I just really loved. And then the last artist I want to feature is Isaiah Scott. And Isaiah was part of the same fellowship program, the Eckelberry Fellowship that I was in. And he's very young. He's still a student at Cornell, and he's studying ornithology, and he's a very passionate bird illustrator too, and he's working on a project of birds of Africa, and I really love his work. And I think he also leads like bird walks that seem really fun, and I would love to meet him in person one day. So thank you so much for tuning in. I would love to answer any questions that you have about my artistic practice, nature art, anything that comes to mind.
So thank you so much, Rosalie. And while everyone takes a moment to add their questions to the chat, I'll just remind you that you have until June 2nd to see her work here in person at RTPI. And we also have a lot of exhibitions, programs, and events coming up over the next few months. So to see everything that we have going on, you can head to rtpi.org. So we hope to see you all here in Jamestown. All right, and I will let Rachel kick us off with a couple of questions.
Yeah, so while people add theirs, I had some sample ones of my own up above. And one was even just if you have like a favorite thing to paint, like if you prefer like plants or landscapes or like different animals.
I would say I really like things that haven't been painted a ton before, or that you don't often see painted. So things like lichen and moss. It just feels a little more exciting to me and especially because sometimes there's a challenge there, like it might look a little strange. For example, I did a painting for my book of snakeskin liverwort, which it's a weird name and it kind of looks weird. But it was a really fun challenge to bring out the beauty and the elegance, even in something that like is kind of slimy and grows on rocks. So I would say, yeah, things that are underrepresented. I really love painting with really vibrant colors, as you can see. So things like moths are really fun for me. Also, something that I feel like I have a lot of room to grow in is capturing the movement of animals. And so that's something that I'm working on. And so that's fun because it feels I have to like really work at it to capture like the energy and the life of an animal. It's really easy to make things look nice, but kind of flat. So something I'm working on.
Nice. There's two questions from Tristan. One is, has your sketchbook project you've been doing helped inspire any new ideas?
Oh, good question, Tristan. So I started a project at the beginning of this year called 100 Days of Play, and basically I wanted to experiment a little more with different materials. And I felt like almost all of the art that I was creating was like 4 set projects. And I wanted to just get back in the habit of making things as they came. Oh my goodness. Sorry. A pileated woodpecker just showed up right outside my window. And I've not seen one out there before. This is exciting. Very good timing. So that project, I think that there's been so much that I've learned. I'm on day 81 of 100 days now, and every morning I've been trying to start my day with this project because I want to get in the habit of like thinking about my art as not just my job, but also like I can put my best energy every morning towards just creating because it's something that I love. And some of the work deadlines can wait a little bit. So I give about an hour each morning to this project. And I came up with a whole bunch of prompts at the beginning, and every day I draw a prompt from my jar. I haven't done today's yet because I was preparing for this, but it's Dream World, so I have no clue what I'm going to do for that. I have no clue what materials I'll use. I just kind of go for it. And one of the things that I've learned through that is that, well, first of all, I think I used to think I'm only good at watercolor or like pen and ink. Those were like my 2 strengths. And now I'm realizing like I can, if I practice, I can get better. Like I've already seen myself grow in using like colored pencils and other materials that are really cool and really fun, but I've kind of dismissed because they didn't seem like real, like adult art materials. I hadn't really used them since high school probably, and I'm discovering that they're really fun to use. And then another thing that's come out of that is just I think feeling like my work, I don't know, when I come back to working on a project that's more nature illustration after taking a break and working on something that's whimsical and expressive, I feel like, okay, yes, I'm like, I've worked hard to have these skills and this is my comfort zone. Because I'm out of my comfort zone for that hour every morning, then I feel like more comfortable coming back into doing my nature illustration work, and I feel more energized for it. I don't know if that makes sense.
And then the second question, and I can also add this to the chat, is where people can pre-order your new book.
Ooh, thanks for asking. You can do that on my website. So there's a tab at the top that says Tiny Worlds Book, and there are a bunch of different options. You can order through your local bookshop if you'd like, through bookshop.com. That's a good way to support your local bookstore, or all the other places where you find your book.
Very nice. All right, and then maybe to wrap up, there was, is there any, oh, just kidding, there's a new message, let me see. Any chance, this is from Bedit, any chance you can give us a sneak peek of what you are working on the easel behind you?
Yes, I can. It's actually the book cover, so I'll show it to you. This is, so the book cover that you just saw, this is the original watercolor for it. So yeah, I usually work much bigger than the actual size that something will be printed, and then I shrink it down so it gets all that nice crisp detail. So I did that for this.
Very cool. All right, and when you're out, oh, let's see. No, sorry, it looked like there was a new message. What is the first thing that captures your attention when you're out in nature?
Ooh. Ooh, this is hard. I feel like I'm a little bit like a squirrel. I get like very excited about all the little things. Um, I would say things that like are new for the season makes me really excited. Like right now, spring ephemerals are still out, and that feels very fresh and very fleeting. So I try to like look for the things that won't be there for very long. So for example, like in the fall, really taking in the leaves and the way that the ferns turn gold right before they kind of crumble and die. Like those fleeting seasonal changes I really like to tune into.
No, don't you dare.
Right, and I think that pretty much wraps it up for questions. Oh, wait, there's one more. Sorry, Carolyn jumped in. She says, I'm asking on behalf of my son, who is a high school art student, what was your educational path after high school?
So after high school, I went to a small college in West Virginia. It was near my hometown where my dad was a professor, and I see that he just popped up on the screen. So I went to this local college, and they didn't have an illustration program, but tuition was cheap, and they had a good graphic design program. So that was my major, but I let all of my professors know that like I really wanted to be an illustrator. And so they found ways for me to incorporate illustration into almost all of my projects, and that was really awesome. And then also I really like to work by hand because I have screen-induced headaches. And so even though I was a graphic designer, which is very computer heavy, they found ways for me to do more hand-drawn stuff and then scan it in and use it for even digital projects like websites. And that was really cool because I was able to come away with knowing how to like make a painting by hand and then scan it in, turn it into whatever I want it to be, do the layout and the typography. And it's really come in handy because I've been able to like design my own books and use my work for all sorts of different things. So it's cool because it wasn't like my dream art school or my dream program, but I worked really hard to just make it a good experience, and it was. And I came away being ready for what I wanted to do. And then after college, I tried to be a freelancer right off the bat, and it didn't work. I got like no jobs. So after a few months of that, I started applying for internships just to kind of figure things out a little more, did a few of those. And then after doing some graphic design stuff for about a year or two, I decided to try again to be a freelance illustrator. And by that time, I'd kind of like created this niche in nature illustration. At least that was my like goal. I realized that I felt like I had, I could find a good audience there that would enjoy my work and enjoy the same things that I like to make. So the second time around, it worked out, and I have not looked back.
Nice. And this isn't a question, but Carolyn, who asked the question, says, this is so helpful. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for your question. I wish your son luck.
So thank you so much to Rosalie again. That was really fantastic. And we're so lucky to have worked with you as a resident artist and on this exhibition. So thank you for everything. And thank you to everyone for joining us. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, everybody. Thanks so much for coming.